Welcome back to the show. On the day of President-elect Donald Trump's inauguration, we'll answer some audience questions. I don't know about keeping it light, but we'll do some non-Trump questions just because, I think there's a little bit of saturation for people going on.
I think that's the happy medium there. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. First question is from Adria, who says, hey guys, when is censoring warranted in news stories, whether it's graphic images, words, or disturbing details? Sometimes it's useful to have very, very specific guidelines for what is or is not allowed on a particular forum or venue. And other times it's best to say, you know it when you see it. And different countries are known to have different standards in terms of what's allowed in the news. When you look at European news about war, it's much more common that you have violent and graphic videos, which arguably help to connect people with the real horrifying nature of war and armed conflict. The counter to that, and we tend to adhere more to this in the United States, is, there's kids watching the news and we don't want to expose young children necessarily to graphic or violent images that maybe their parents don't want them to see or whatever is the case. Now, you know that I've made the case many times that when it comes to censorship of fiction shows, right? So whether it's nudity or swearing or whatever, in Argentina, where I was born, swearing and nudity on TV, I'm not talking about porn, but swearing and nudity is not really considered a big deal, right? Nobody's worried about it's going to ruin children's lives if they see a breast or maybe hear an F-bomb or whatever the case may be.
Goes back to our puritanical society.
Absolutely does here in the United States. And I'm sort of fine with that. And I've said it makes no sense at all for the government to be wasting time, money, and resources enforcing that type of thing. When it comes to censorship in news stories, I think it's much more difficult to say, I am for telling the whole story, but then you get really specific issues like, okay, do you show a picture of a perpetrator in a terrorist attack? Do you not show the picture but use their name? Do you not even use their name? Because any information that you give about them is going to say, hey, if you do something terrible, you will be famous. And it could in some way encourage other people to commit acts of violence. I believe that to the extent that graphic images, words, or details help us to be better informed about the context, implications, and consequences of whatever the news story is, I say include them. For example, a counterexample would be if you have a story about a horrible death in a car accident, for example, are you really adding to the story by showing autopsy pictures of the dead person's body? I don't think that you are. I think it's pretty easy to get a sense of how horrific a car accident can be from the fact that you're reporting someone died and you're showing the mangled car and you're showing the family members of the victim crying or whatever. I don't know that we're gaining much by showing autopsy pictures. That's one example. On the other hand, I think that if there has been a terrorist attack, that it's perfectly fine to show, again, you can decide what level of detail you want to zoom in on, but the fact that if there was a terrorist attack at an airport, there are dead bodies on the ground. I'm okay with that. I think that does contextualize the real horrors of the environment where the attack took place.
I think it really depends on the scenario, the context, and it differs each scenario to the next.
Yeah.
I think there are definitely reasons why you would want to censor things. Like, for example, if there was a victim of some major crash or catastrophe or something, I could see that the victim and their family may not want to have that information and those images released to the public.
And so you're talking about like personal details. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because those are the victims and aren't the perpetrators, I think they have every right to have their identity sealed.
How about words? With words, I'm way more loose. I think there are very few situations where I would advocate the self-censorship of words when it comes to explaining what happened in a news story. For me, it's more about decisions on graphic videos and pictures.
Yeah, especially with words. The word that comes to my mind is the N-word, because if you're quoting someone else using that in context, I think most news reporters are weary of quoting them verbatim.
Yeah, that's
a very tricky thing.
I think that's interesting. I tend to, I don't use the N-word personally, but I don't know that
if you're quoting someone else.
Yeah, I don't even know that we have necessarily a policy on the show. But generally speaking, if we have a video or a quote from someone else, we'll use the full N-word, I think. That's generally the policy. And again, our decisions are more based on there are certain words which our broadcast affiliates cannot air because they will get fined by the FCC, we obviously censor those. But beyond that, we tend not to censor.
Yeah, and then when it comes to images and video clips, we have this debate every time one comes up because there was an assassination of one of those Russian officials a few weeks ago.
Right.
And we really just opened it up to the audience over whether or not we should show it.
Show the video, yeah. One other thought on this. There are some people who will hear me saying, David, oh my God, David, you're such a special snowflake, trigger warning, safe space, clown, cuck, whatever, right? The truth is that this isn't about being a special snowflake or being triggered or whatever. It's about, do we need to show anything that we can find simply for the sake of being salacious and inflammatory, and if it leads, it bleeds type of thing? And so for me, the question is not, am I trying to protect people? It's, am I crafting a story that is fully informative? And do I need to go out of my way to include graphic images if they don't actually add to the telling of the story? That's my standard.
I agree with that policy. Yeah, you shouldn't go out of your way to include information that's not necessary or pertinent to the story. But if everyone else is reporting in the same way, I think you should go along with that.